I can't say exchange fluids. I've read. What is that like? Imagine living in America in a time in which many members of your community start dropping like flies. From mysterious illness that seems to come on suddenly and lead to almost inevitable death. Nobody knows what it is or how it's transmitted. All they know is they wanted to protect their families. Desperate to save the ones you love, you exhume previous loved ones and burn their vital organs and consume the ashes. Welcome back or welcome to my channel. My name is Dan Reed, and if you've been following along, I've been talking a lot about vampires. In part one of this series, I talked about vampire folklore throughout time, and in part two, I talked about vampire panic, although that would suggest it was more widespread, but vampire burials or anti-vampiric burials in Europe would be more accurate. And today we are going to be talking about the vampire panic in America. You may have heard of it, you may not have. If you are interested in these types of topics or other spooky topics like maybe ghosts or mummies or zombies, make sure to leave a like and subscribe so that I know that you are watching and that you like what you see. All right, let's start with why people were getting sick and why were we exhuming bodies of dead people. Tuberculosis, known as consumption at the time, ran rampant through America and various regions of the world. Nobody knew what caused it or how it was transmitted, although there were theories. Depending on who you asked, it was caused by a lack of exercise or an overindulgence in sex and food or alcohol, or those who had a passion for dancing. Yep, dancing too much. Not here. Mm-mm. You will get tuberculosis. The disease attacks the respiratory system, causing chest pains, trouble breathing, coughing, and sometimes accompanied with blood. Symptoms also include tiredness, night chills, and weight loss. Essentially, those that were afflicted would start to waste away. TB, or tuberculosis, or consumption, whatever you want to call it, is caused by a bacteria. Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which can spread through air droplets when the infected speaks or coughs. We now know how the disease spreads and how to treat it, but at the time they didn't have this knowledge. The idea that one could get sick through microscopic organisms was laughable, like literally, or like they thought you were insane. Look up the guy who invented washing his hands. They sent him to a nut hut. And physicians during this time would have little to no formal training. As a result, many rural or isolated areas would have to resort to folklore medicine in order to treat their sick. This was also a period of great immigration, as many people would come from the old country or the old world and bring with them their own traditions and beliefs, such as the belief in vampires and their ability to spread disease from beyond the grave. Now, once again, these aren't the walking, talking, sexy, undead vampires that we know and love today. These were more like evil or demonic spirits that would possess corpses. Less sexy. And with this brought the idea of exhuming the dead, but rather as a method of prevention or protection. This was more medicinal. If you remember from the last video about vampire burials, they would exhume bodies. They would exhume the bodies of the deceased and either mutilate them or leave apotropaic or protective charms like coins in the grave to protect them, or they would put sickles or drive spikes into the limbs in order to a possessed body, from rising up out of the grave. A sign of vampiric possession would entail fresh blood either around the mouth or face area, and of course, bloating of the body. Now, we now know that the presence of blood and fluids and bloating is a normal process of decomposition. But at this time, they did not have this knowledge. It doesn't mean that they were inferior. It is just simple. We have 100+ years of knowledge from this time. Like I said, the idea of bacteria was not even in their realm at that time. When one individual from a family would become sick, it wouldn't be too far long till other members became afflicted. So, as a result, those who had recently succumbed to that illness would be the prime suspect in spreading the disease. But not in the way that we know, as in transmission through through droplets in close proximity, like one might do when they live together. That sounds gross. Let me try that again. No, I can't say exchange fluids.
What are you doing, step bro?
But people spit a little when they talk, and in close quarters with your family, you probably spit on them. But like, you know what I mean. So anyway, this practice of exhuming the dead was not widespread, but there are dozens of documentations of this. This is from official records, so newspapers and government documents, reports of communities digging up the recently deceased, burning their vital organs, and then sometimes even consuming the ashes. One of the most widely known cases is from Exeter, Rhode Island, in the case of Mercy Brown. In 1892, Mercy, along with her mother and sister, bodies were exhumed. This was due to the failing health of their still living brother Edwin and pressure from the community. It had appeared that the Brown family was the only one afflicted, and this brought growing concern around the community that a vampiric spirit had possessed one of their dead. As a result, they urged the father, George Brown, to exhume the bodies of his family. George was repulsed by this idea, but eventually he gave in, if only to put the concerns of the community at ease. When they exhumed Mrs. Brown, his wife, her remains were pretty much mummified, with no signs of blood. Then the daughter, Mary Olive, in which they only found a skeleton remaining. Then next, Mercy Brown. Her remains stood out, yet she had been buried for nearly 3 months, and yet her cheeks still remained rosy, and there were signs of blood. They had finally found their vampire, or so they thought. And what they did next was horrifying. They proceeded to remove her heart and burn it. Then the remaining ashes were mixed into water and then fed to her brother Edwin. Unfortunately, their efforts were futile, and Edwin still succumbed to the disease. Mercy's wasn't the only case in which the heart was removed and then cremated. In Vermont, Rachel Harris died of consumption in 1790. Her husband, Captain Isaac Burton, was devastated, but eventually moved on. So he remarried. However, soon after their marriage, his new bride began feeling sick, under the same mysterious circumstances as his previous wife, Rachel Harris. He was living the same nightmare all over again. What was he to do? Then, an aunt comes along and starts slinging accusations of his beloved deceased wife had come back as a demon vampire and was infecting his new bride. This was based off the proclamation that his wife had made on her deathbed, saying to her beloved husband, "I'll always be with you." So naturally, what do? You exhume her body. And then they find her bloated corpse. They start removing the heart, the liver, and her lungs. And then they cremate them. Now, allegedly, this is just alleged, They did the same thing. They mixed her ashes with water and then fed them to the new wife. I'm not sure what happened to her. I'm sure she probably still, unfortunately, eventually died. If not from the illness, then maybe from consuming cremated remains, because that will make you sick. Two centuries later, Rachel Harris was exonerated of her vampiric accusations, and Manchester officials granted her back her dignity, unveiling a new memorial marker. Well deserved. Another case in Vermont occurred in Woodstock. A 20-year-old Dartmouth student, Frederick Ransom, died of consumption in 1817 and was later exhumed after his mother and three siblings also fell ill. And guess what happened? His heart was removed and burned. Similarly, in 1890, the Vermont Standard published a story of a young man with the last name of Corwin. He had died from consumption and not too much longer, and not much longer, and not much later. And soon after, his little brother had fallen ill. So they did what they did and exhumed the body, and to their horror, found blood remaining in his heart. So they removed it. But this is where they switched things up. They boiled it and then buried it in a hole, which was then covered with granite. Now, this case is a lot less verifiable. While it did reference real physicians in the community at the time, the rest of the story cannot be proven. It is believed that this specific story is basically a retelling of the ransom case. While we can see some similarities between the vampire panic in Europe and the vampire panic in America, as one did influence the other, there was an entirely different motivation between the two worlds. While exhumation was common practice in the Europe cases to observe the state of the remains, and if the body remained preserved or bloated or bloody, then vampiric possession was suspected. We also saw this in the cases in America. Although in Europe, they would attempt to prevent them from rising out of the grave by placing stones on the body or piercing vital organs. While in America, they would remove the vital organs, mainly the heart, as the soul is believed to reside in the heart, thus preventing them from coming out of the grave. But again, prevention was not the main priority. For Europe, it was entirely preventative. They wanted to either protect their deceased or just stop them from creating general chaos in communities. But in America, it was mostly medicinal. They didn't know how the disease was spread and didn't have any successful treatments for it. All they knew is that people were dying from this mysterious illness, and desperate people will take desperate measures, which include digging up the bodies of the deceased and consuming cremated ashes. And while it may not have actually healed people from the disease, it may have healed communities. As we can see in the case of Mercy Brown, her father didn't even believe in any of that. He only did it to ease the concerns of his community. Thankfully, the panic was not widespread. As embalming became more common practice and germ theory became more widely recognized, the panic just kind of slowly faded away. And thankfully now we have a way to treat and prevent tuberculosis. And that's all I have for you folks today. I feel like this was a much shorter video than usual. Give you guys a little break from my yapping. But I hope to see you in the next video. And remember to like this video if you like what you're seeing, and subscribe so you can see more of me. And I'll see you in the next video.